The time is just gone 7 minutes past 8 p.m. as we continue with tonight's edition of Wednesday Nights with myself, Inayat Wadi, and it's time now for the next hour to focus on the President's speech with regard to South Africa and the energy plans for the country. And for far too long, this has been the most single issue that has dominated this country in more ways than one. Whether we are talking about load shedding, we're talking about the insufficient energy needs of the country, and this has affected the country in more ways than one. And to analyze, to dissect, and to unpack South Africa's, in fact, the energy plans as proposed by the president of the country, we joined this evening by Adil Nchabeleng, who is an energy expert, and also Brendan Slade, OUTA project manager on energy. Crown Prince Adil Nchabeleng, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Walaikum salam, and thank you so much.
Yes, and Brendan Slade, to you as well. We thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out talking to us. Welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Adil, this latest development, and we're talking about the president of the country addressing the energy crisis in the country. And this is something that obviously we wanted the president to address a long time ago. But it clearly has got to a critical stage. And looking at, his decision to address this issue at this point in time. Just your thoughts and an overall view on the urgency that the president obviously has shown regarding this particular matter.
Well, I think in a sense that there's been a definite response towards load shedding. That must be applauded. And the fact that the government has realized that we're sitting in a critical quagmire situation, that must be applauded, because one, we have an energy resource plan that has been drawn up and finalized and gazetted and published as a plan with regards to the law, but has never been fully implemented, and there's been several attempts to get to the point whereby all the plans that are contained in the IRP 19 can actually be implemented. So finally, I think because of the frustration experienced by everybody, the whole of South Africa is really up in arms on the basis that they are unhappy at the level at which government has been attending to the issue of Eskom. And as a result, it had pushed, the decision makers, particularly the president and the cabinet, to come up with a plan that will actually talk to how they're going to do a turnaround and actually the supplementing of energy generation. With regards to the plan, there's two issues to it. One is a lovely plan for, market opportunity from an open market point of view, for introducing competition, for actually stimulating the economy in terms of bringing in, new technology opportunities, whereby people can participate in the independent power production and beyond the independent power production scope, where people can even do their own small modular generation, where it's called embedded generation. And then that's really what South Africa needs to go through. But at the same time, very small detail was actually contained in terms of how Eskom is going to be turned around, except when he explained that they are in the finalization stages of ensuring that Eskom is broken up and unbundled into the 3 units that will start to exist at the end of this year. So, that issue of maintaining power plants, bringing them up to efficiency levels of higher than 70 to 80 to 85% efficiency levels, which is the energy availability factor, has not really been outlined, and there's really not much of a commitment. Yes, there is a talk that there will be prioritization of resources, which is budget, as well as hopefully treasury funding that would help to turn around Eskom's current, power plants. But we are sitting with almost 20,000 megawatts, which are missing out of the grid from an Eskom point of view, which means almost half of Eskom's power plants are non-functional today on the unit side of it. So that is something that I would have really appreciated to hear much more details on. On the opportunities for the open market, it's an incredible proposition. The fact that they've done away with all licensing requirements, as well as when people want to bring in new energy into the grid, is a fantastic opportunity. The fact that they've even allowed for Eskom to buy all forms of electricity generated on its own is a game changer. So we're looking at a very interesting plan. it will have challenges on the basis that load shedding is still going to continue because there hasn't been a firm commitment in respect to how load shedding is going to be addressed in terms of bringing in at least minimum of a 5 to 10,000 megawatts of the current ESCOM fleet that is currently down.
Yes, Adil. And also, Brendan, Adil speaks about a game changer, but how hot a political potato has this actually been for the government that has basically, some would say, have forced the hand of the president to now react to the crisis?
No, most definitely. This hot potato is something that changed hands quite a lot. And I mean, we can go on for quite an extensive period on blaming government for only taking action now. Yes, energy experts have been talking to government over this issue for years. So we do have the plan now. As Adil has highlighted, there's a bit lacking in detail, but we do have a blueprint nonetheless. And what stands out, which does instill some form of confidence among South Africans, is that, first of all, government has acknowledged that this is a national problem. Second, that government has also acknowledged that it cannot only be Eskom that will solve this problem going forward. So that is why the plan incorporates private investments going forward, a streamlining of new generation capacity. And it's good that the solutions proposed in this plan is not just short term. So yes, to eradicate load shedding immediately going forward, we need to address new generation capacity immediately. And the plan does point that out. But the plan does not just come up with plugging the hole for the short term. It also focuses on going much further than that. Once we cross this hurdle of getting the new generation capacity up as soon as possible, there's the question of sustainability, the maintenance of Eskom's current fleet, and how we are just going to continue to bring new generation capacity online from here. Obviously, we still need to see more details on this, how the public exactly will become involved, and how the procurement processes will work. But just in a nutshell, from OUTA's perspective, it is a very, very much breath of fresh air coming from the president. And we are confident as civil society that at least we are heading in the right direction.
Yes. Adil, just when one unpacks what the president had to say, and I know you and I have had this discussion in the past, and this was at the time when Andre de Ruyter was appointed, and the unbundling of Eskom was a major talking point. And now that the president has now addressed this issue again, and just your thoughts, at this point in time on Eskom, where it is, and possibly even to revisit what we had discussed in the past regarding the unbundling of Eskom, and how this is actually going to ensure that Eskom progresses and delivers, which is more important.
At this stage, I mean, look, unbundling is not neither here nor there in my view. Whether you unbundle Eskom or you leave it as it is and continue with the current operation is not going to help much. Remember, the function of Eskom has functioned for over 100 years. I mean, more than 100 years, from 1886. That's where the power utility was created. Back then in the days of Kimberley, right up to the days where Johannesburg was created as a mining town, and then all the other generation in terms of the mining industry when it started. So the history of how Eskom was created, I think it's a complete lack of vision and focus on what they are currently doing towards Eskom. You're going to disintegrate this company, break it apart, cause the unbundling of Eskom, and break up. There was a lot of things that were wrong at an ideological level with apartheid, particularly on the race and the race separations and the racism issue. But in terms of infrastructure development and other things, they did really quite an amazing work, in a sense that they built one of the most robust infrastructure in Africa and in South Africa, given the fact that what they have achieved during apartheid is what we as a new government in South Africa should have continued the legacy and picked up from there and built up this country that we want to see as a great country. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. I mean, you're sitting with a situation where we are busy disintegrating an incredible infrastructure which was built during the 40s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we haven't built anything onto it except just to extend the reach of the network. And that is where currently the biggest blame on the ANC government is. The focus should have been on ensuring that ESCOM is functional, ESCOM is brought back into line, ESCOM is expanded. If they needed new opportunities for adding additional power to the grid, or even making sure that all other players can have access to the grid, you do what all other countries do. You have a wheeling agreements, you have a network extension whereby other players can plug in into the existing network and expand it for themselves. So breaking it up into this cosmetic corporate structuring, restructuring of ESCOM, and having transmission on one side, having distribution on one side, and having generation on one side is not going to do any much of a difference. It's actually going to cause a problem on the aspect of bundling up of costs, because everywhere in the world, unbundling, which is privatization in a very cozy way, has caused a lot of national problems, because at some point the market is not going to play friendly towards the consumers and the nation when they need their pound of flesh in terms of charging prices that they want, like it has happened in the steel industry, it has happened in the cement industry, it has happened in the bricks industry, it has happened in all other key industries like telecommunication. These players don't play any fair or even nice. They want their pound of flesh in terms of maximizing of profits. And in a developmental state like South Africa, you need a robust state-based infrastructure company that serves the needs of the developing and developmental state. And that is how, where we must give praise where it is due. During the apartheid days, they built that infrastructure. They built the ESCOM that we're enjoying today. And ESCOM was under a commission. It was called an Electricity and Energy Supply Commission at the time, which was actually an NGO under the state, under a commission which was created by the state in order to provide electricity and provide it very cheaply and make it completely accessible. However, the challenges was it was not made to reach all the other ends and parts of South Africa. It didn't reach the rural areas in terms of its access and reach, which is what the ANC did. They expanded the network to make sure that it reaches all the other, unserved areas, from 60% service to over in a 90% service at the current stage, where it actually reaches almost every corner of the households in South Africa. So, we have to have historical context. So when we talk about bundling, we're talking really a backdoor privatization, which most of us disagree with. And most of the unions are completely in disagreement with. NUM is not agreeing with it. COSATU is partially here there because they have to take a position that is pleasing. But unbundling is not going to be something that is going to be the good news for South Africa. We have seen it when you privatize the likes of Telkom, when you privatize ISCO, when they privatized the cement manufacturing company, when they privatized Telkom, when they privatized some water utilities. The problems it created in the long run, because you're no longer chasing a developmental model. Instead, you are now at the behest and call of profiteers who want their pound of flesh in terms of profit making and maximization. The steel industry is quite a good example. When ISCO was broken apart, the price of steel went on a runaway mill. Where today you can't even contain it. It's over 1,000+% in terms of price increases since the time it was unbundled. So unbundling is not going to be a solution to our current problem in South Africa. We're a developmental, most poor state, the highest level of unemployment, the highest level of poverty, the highest level of underdevelopment in terms of lifestyle. For that reason, you need a state-owned operation. Any other company can come in and plug in their own transmission, their own distribution solution, their own generation, but not on the backbone of destroying ESCOM and opening it up to vulture interests that are going to capture it and actually start selling us electricity at a high price.
Yes, Adil, and also Brendan, when one looks at the actions that have been proposed by the president and talking about transforming the electricity sector to achieve long-term energy security and the privatization, and Adil, you can comment on that after I speak to Brendan. Talking about privatization, but here we're talking about statements that are being made. ESCOM is being unbundled to create an independent state-owned transmission company. Now, just your reading into this, because on the one hand, we are concerned about privatization, and here we're talking about an independent state-owned transmission company. Is it possible? Is it ever possible?
No, certainly point taken, and I also take the points made by Adil. I just think we need to understand the whole unbundling in context first. I disagree with the fact that the unbundling would result in runaway prices from the private sector. But from an administrative and legislative point of view, we do think that the unbundling eventually will result in more efficiency and more sufficiency of the particular operations and aspects which Eskom now as a single entity needs to perform. What the plan also suggested is that Eskom will still remain the owner of the grid. So there won't be any form of privatization of the grid aspects. And then we obviously need to talk about the implementation of wheeling tariff. So where the wheeling tariff should come in, obviously we need some more details on that going forward, is that would act as the equilibrium to soften the blow for tariffs to run away. Obviously, there are profiteers out there, but with the reformation in the new proposed legislation, certainly government will have thought of the proper regulations to put in place to stimulate proper competition. Because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, but currently internationally, there is a silent energy revolution taking place. And we are now experiencing the first steps of Eskom's monopoly, which it currently has from a competition perspective, being, mind the pun, but being unbundled. And that could just be a proper simulation for competition going forward. And with proper competition in the line, we would definitely start seeing a decrease in tariffs going forward.
Yes, certainly. Adil, just a comment from your side. Because I raise this issue surrounding between about privatization and the government talking about being an independent, state-owned transmission company.
Yeah, the ITSMO itself, the independent state-owned transmission and market operator model, it's called ITSMO. Look, it's a great idea for the private sector to play in terms of buying and selling of electricity, but it does not help us in the general solution of actually managing. As I said to you, this thing should have been run parallel. In my view, if you want, an independent, transmission and market operator, look at what happened in America. They had the same system. It collapsed. When there were certain issues that happened in the US, it collapsed completely. They couldn't even operate it properly. There were market collapses. There were price increases. There were issues relating to the whole system itself. Go to Australia, go to, the UK and other opportunities that were created. The idea appeals more on a business level side of it, but it does not serve much on a developmental state. As I said to you, the ideas should have been experimented in isolation to the current robust infrastructure we're sitting with. Tell everybody it's fine. You want to do your own transmission, create your own generation, put in your own pipe, long distance transmission, as well as your distribution network. You can do that partially in an environment where you're starting up new projects like new towns and everything. But when you're existing with South Africa, where we have over 35,000 kilometers of transmission lines, we have, distribution infrastructure, which is so vast and complex that you have each municipality running their own substations, and those substations connecting up households, which are going into tens of thousands. When you start splitting up that, how do you even quantify, for that matter, the value of that infrastructure for the access and everything? So it's a complication. It's an unnecessary exercise at this stage, because what is going to create in the long run is you're going to have vulture interest. Yes, Brandon says that there might be a price decrease, but I've been tracking some of these prices of electricity throughout the years. We were the most cheapest in terms of electricity. When we started introducing after 2011, by the way, IPPs, we became one of the most expensive electricity transmission company as well as distribution in the world, by the way. Only after we have started introducing certain measures of privatization, that is when prices started skyrocketing, because it had an impact in terms of production of the main company, which is Eskom in this case. So the solutions, yes, are wonderful on paper, but when it comes to practicality and what history has taught us, it's not the same. We know that there is opportunistic interest, there's vulture interest that says that Eskom is making a whole lot of money and they want a value share in that money. But it does not help us at the stages where we are, which is the developmental economy and state that we are sitting with. If you want to unbundle Eskom and make sure that it becomes efficient as an energy supply company. Focus on what was done before. You already had the divisions in Eskom, by the way, which focused on distribution, focused on transmission. There were divisions that purely focused on the corporate, divisional level, that focused purely on generation. All the efficiencies were in place until recently, when we had the load shedding situation, and when people started realizing that actually the machinery is falling apart. One, on the basis that there were interests that wanted to come in and hijack Eskom. That is why we had problems of supply, we had problems of procurement, we had problems of people having themselves long-term green, evergreen agreements and contracts of coal supply and everything. And on top of it, you had 2 or 3 major suppliers who were sitting with the engineering contracts, and they had destroyed what Eskom had created during apartheid days, where they had their own molds, where they could produce and refurbish, as well as come up with these components and make them from scratch in South Africa, including the cabling, the harnessing, including all of this transmission. Remember, South Africa has been pioneering during the apartheid days in terms of transmission technology, the distribution technology. Most of these things were manufactured, and some of the patents of the transmission lines, the long distance, high voltage transmission lines, were created in South Africa. So it's as if we have lost a institutional memory on what was done well at the time when Eskom was at its helm, was one of the top utility company in the world in terms of research and innovation, in terms of price and quality, in terms of guarantee of electricity and distribution and the transmission side of it. Now we're talking about a hodgepodge of everything, try out this, try out that, but the fundamentals of it is making the utilities work and work efficiently has been forgotten. And that is why we keep on saying that you cannot exchange engineering ideas with wishful thinking. Right now, what is happening is wishful. Corporate restructuring means nothing when it comes to fundamentals. You can paint your car. As long as it's not running efficiently, the color is not going to make any difference to it. The fact that you have put the blue color on the door and you have a white fender, or you have a green, a boot or bonnet, it makes no difference to the running and efficiency of the car. It will still be running and smoking. The parts will be falling apart. The operation of the vehicle. So get the fundamentals right, which is the engineering side of it. Get the part that works the most better and make them sure that they are working efficiently. Then you can start talking about how do you introduce all these other experimental ideas into the system.
Well, definitely. And also, I think, Brendan, when we're talking about regulation, and this is extremely important, and, you're talking about blueprint, but until now, there's been a lot of red tape as well. And also looking at the electricity regulation amendment bill, the government talking about fast tracking so that they can establish a competitive market. But again, as Adil speaks about, and he talks about, the knowledge base that we've had, the skills base that we had. And recently, we even heard of Praveen Gordhan making an approach to the Solidarity Union, asking for the top 100 people, for want of a better term, retired engineers. And we can unbundle, we can talk, we can have all the regulation in the world. If we don't have the people to do the job, we are on a back foot immediately, and we will still be where we are today.
No, certainly we do need all hands on deck, and the transfer of skills is also a very pertinent question, because obviously when these power stations were built historically, the power stations were built according to a specific spec at the time. And we are experiencing technology advancements at an accelerated rate, which we have not seen before. And I think just for future sustainability and energy security, that skill transfer needs to be harnessed by various spheres of government. So it cannot just rest within the DMRE. And we cannot look beyond the practical implications of what this plan needs to be. So yes, we can talk about the pipe dreams, we can talk about what needs to happen, but at the end of the day, we need the personnel, we need the station managers, we need the experts there to drive the operations, because let's face it, they have done so in the past, and they have done a stellar job up to some point, up to the point where state capture came to ravage everything. So at the end of the day, it is a question of how will we retain the skills, or at least how will we get the skills back that left? How will we retain those skills? And how will we ensure that the skills are then transferred and then create a ripe environment for proliferation of new jobs for the new youths coming in, for that skill to become part of a sustainable developmental state. It would be optimistic to say that this will happen overnight. It will certainly not happen overnight. But as I mentioned earlier, it is a blueprint, and it is obviously something that the country can work towards. But again, this will require cooperation from all spheres of government, going right from the DMRE through to Department of Education, Higher Education, CETAs, if I can even add that to the mix. Yes, that's pretty much it as far as skills are concerned.
Well, certainly. And also, Adil, when one looks at alternative sources of energy, and we know the president has spoken about, things like solar energy. We're talking about wind energy as well. And there is this huge debate that has been going on for a very, very long time. Clean power versus dirty power, global standards, what's happening, what's taking place globally. But when one looks at countries like Germany, for instance, when one looks at countries like Britain as well, and looking at South Africa, looking at our coal resources, our coal supply as well, and they had to revert back. They were basically forced back to coal as well at some point in time when the need was absolutely critical. And where does this actually fit in terms from a policy perspective, but also at the same time looking at addressing the critical shortage that you speak about, and you spoke about the missing 50% earlier?
In terms of the shortfall, look, the developed world is highly hypocritical. And this is where our leaders never learn the lesson. When they get given these policy imperatives, they never sit back and ask themselves what is in our best interest. Because all of other countries work in what is in their best interest. There is nothing wrong with green technology. There is nothing wrong with low emissions. There is nothing wrong in actually capping down CO2 and ensuring that we have a cleaner environment. And all of those things are excellent and must be encouraged going forward into the future. But look at the trend of all the developed countries. China is producing almost 1 million megawatts of electricity, all right, out of coal, out of nuclear, and then a percentage of it comes out of small, very, sort of a minor percentage comes out of renewables. And they're not even using those renewables for mega industries. So what we are told and what is actually in practice is contrary to everything. We are being used as South Africa with this COP27 now or 26 agreement that says South Africa must move away from coal. We are being used as a guinea pig for testing out a model which is supposed to be a futuristic model. But it's going to devastate the economy of South Africa. It's going to devastate not only the economy, it's going to devastate livelihoods. It's going to devastate the people living in this country in terms of their dependency on the generation of electricity. So the plans themselves are not genuine at an international global level, but they are being pressed and pushed upon Africa to implement on the basis that we are being actually used as a test ground. Germany, for instance, has very hypocritical interests. Germany right now has issued out a government memorandum that states very clearly that you will all open up every power plant that was coal and that was closed. And not only that, it will be open up for the nearer future for 5 years to 20 years to come. And brand new power stations on coal must be built. Why? Because they just experienced the shortage of gas out of Russia and some of the issues that they've been challenged with. So they're going back to coal in a massive level. And not forgetting that Germany has a lot of coal-based resources as well as power plants. So where is the truth in all of these things that says South Africa must actually shut down its economy, must shut down its coal-producing facilities, and must stop producing anything out of coal? Well, we know that everything, even including solar panels, including all the green technologies, are all made from coal directly as a resource, are made out of coal material that is used and blended in all of these resources and minerals to produce any of these things, whether it's solar panels, whether it's to do with blades that produces this steel that they use for wind turbines, whether it's to do with all of the hydro technology and everything. It's all out of coal. So, there is a hypocrisy at a global level. And that hypocrisy is now translating into intimidating our own leaders, who are very timid in a big way. They are so silly in a sense that they will agree to adopting policies for the sake that they get paid pittances, because most of them, we know, when they adopt some of these policies, they are paid in return a certain portion of revenue and fees in order to push some of this interest. They're not doing it for the South African interest. They are doing it for their own pockets, and they are doing it for their own so-called going out into retirement packages. And that money does not even actually get registered into the state. They're given incentives for pushing certain policies, and they're paid corruption and bribe, some of them, in order to actually push some of this interest. But at the fundamental level, those countries are not doing any of it. Europe has not stopped anything in terms of gas or coal or to do with all the other baseload technology production. Instead, they are going very heavy on it, including nuclear and everything. But you come to South Africa, they tell you, no, nuclear is a no-go area. We must not even talk about it. When South Africa was the leading country of nuclear over the last 60, 70 years in the world. You talk about coal power plants. We created some of the most incredible coal power plants during that last 70 to 80 years in South Africa in terms of efficiency. The concept of the six-pack power builds, which was actually created in South Africa, where they were building six-pack units of any power station, and those power stations became the de facto normal standard of building power stations. Was all created in South Africa in terms of mega power stations. So there is certain historical memory lapse that we enter into, and we forget what we have done well, and we do this whole experimental thing. Green energy works very efficiently on managing of transmission as well as storage, as well as harvesting of electricity on a very minute microgrid scale. It works perfectly, whether you're using too much, on efficiency levels, measuring what is being used where, what is being sent where, and all of those things. It's the technology that has been highly efficient there. Wonderful. It should be integrated into the larger, big scale management of our utilities. But as you know, you and I, that most of our houses are not even wired in a sense that it can measure all the instrumentation that are actually utilizing electricity, nor even manage them for that matter. So we're talking highly advanced in a highly underdeveloped environment when we should have been scaling in terms of adaptation, as well as ensuring that there is less wastage of electricity. Yes, there's a lot of wastage of electricity. It's produced, whether it is used efficiently, we don't know because you can't measure. And that is where the new green technology comes in, where it can give you instrumentation for measuring if you harness it and wire it properly, and you understand each and every component that is currently drawing out electricity from the system, and that is generating electricity and sending out into the system or used within a microgrid environment. So the fundamentals must be understood. The science of it is fixed in this sense. You cannot not have baseload electricity. And you cannot run away from the fact that we have to experiment with new technologies that gives you higher levels of efficiencies in terms of managing the utilization of energy. Then comes in the debate of storage, battery storage. Battery storage is incredibly brilliant, but at the time we are in, it's still at an infancy level. Most of the batteries, even if it's a 5 megawatt pack of a battery storage, that battery storage to distribute electricity, it will only produce a certain amount of hours of electricity at a certain amount of kilowatt or megawatt capacity. If it's a 5, for instance, it will give you a 5 megawatts capacity of electricity over, for instance, 4 to 6 hours of actually depressing that energy out of the battery, transferring it there. But the other processes, nobody talks about where that energy is going to be resourced from in terms of charging the battery and making sure that it's stored. So there is a misalignment of understanding these fundamentals. Europe, all the developed states that have signed up for the COP26 or COP whatever, agreement, have all been hypocrites, and they are continuing to be hypocrites. We are the only idiots in the continent, in the world, who are following this example of people who have failed, who are using aid donor money as a country in order to depress our economy and destroy it, when we should have said, gentlemen, do what China did. China says, wonderful, we agree to all of these plans, but remember, we still have our own interests. We have our own baseload interests for our industries and development and our people's lives. But we will adopt the technologies and interests, but we will face it in such a way that it does not cause problems in terms of our development of our economy, and it does not cause price instability. In China, electricity is not even discussed as an issue of buying it. It's actually discussed as an issue of contribution to its GDP and growing of its industries and making sure that China becomes this highly developed economy. So we should actually have the change of minds. But these current leaders are not the right people, really, to be honest and fair. including the ruling party. They're not the right people to be actually leading us on any issues of energy. They're completely misled. Most of them don't know what they're talking about. Most of them don't have a clue what needs to be done and are guessworking continuously. And they don't even want to engage. The president gave a big lie when he said that he engaged with South Africans and all stakeholders. He didn't engage with the major stakeholders and people like ourselves who know what should be done. And most of the experts in the industry that have been sidelined because they are engineering fundamentalists who says that, yes, you can introduce this amount of renewables, but you're not going to make a dent and impact on load shedding because the limitation of the science of electricity production on its own. So when you say that you are doing certain things, but at the same time you are alienating people who could be helping you, it's very disingenuous because then there is an interest that has been pushed, and unfortunately that interest tramples everything that we stand for.
Yes, Adil. Brendan, perhaps you'd just like to add, some of the issues that obviously Adil has been touching on. And I see a tweet that's come through that went up on screen and from Naledi, which says, to summarize for those who missed the hashtag family meeting, President Ramaphosa established the National Energy Crisis Committee, and ESCOM will now buy electricity instead of producing it. However, load shedding will continue. Now, we've seen since Tuesday, surprisingly, Brendan, that we haven't had load shedding since the speech.
No, that is definitely correct. And I think what we also need to understand with the plan going forward, there's no mention that ESCOM will start building new generation capacity. ESCOM will be the center of everything happening around it, but the actual building, the actually connecting up to the grid will be done by private entities. So this is again just to emphasize what I said earlier on the bringing down of ESCOM's monopoly. And on the issue of buying power, there was also mentioned in the plan that we will tap into the Southern African power pool for additional electricity. Currently, we are buying around 1,500 megawatts from neighboring countries. But that is a very, I don't want to say lucrative for South Africa, but that is a very good solution for the plan going forward, because we buy in terms of international agreements. We do not need to buy in terms of procurement systems that are more often than not riddled with corruption. So what we can do going forward, and there needs to be more details in the plan, is we need to have an offtake agreement, particularly if and when we need certain power. Coincidentally, believe it or not, South Africa, at certain instances, we have a surplus of electricity. So that will then result in us selling electricity back to neighboring countries and vice versa. So at the end of the day, ESCOM will become a more dominant buyer of electricity as opposed to a generator of electricity, which it's a double-edged sword, but at this stage, we can agree that ESCOM does not have the capital to build new generation capacity. As far as coal generation is concerned, a lot of the old power plants are slowly approaching their end-of-life cycle. And it is in this crisis that we are currently sitting in that the cost and time lapse on connecting renewable energies to the grid will fill this gap in the immediate short term. But that does not mean that we will immediately wean off of being reliant on coal. With the COP funding coming to South Africa, and yes, I do acknowledge that perhaps there may be some form of bribery taking place. I mean, that is endemic all across the world. It's not just a South African problem. But the funding will help not only to start with new generation capacity for renewables, but it may also be utilized to improve the existing infrastructure to allow those renewables to operate sufficiently. So it will not be a matter of just South Africa receiving this donor funds from Western countries, going into some form of experimental phase on testing out new renewable sources, but it will effectively be utilized, or it ought to be utilized, to up the grid, to up the ante. Whether we like it or not, demand is growing by the day, technology is moving forward, and our infrastructure is aging. And this is the solution that we need to work with now. Obviously, we need more details. The blueprints are there. It's outlined. And I do agree that further public participation, further consultation with stakeholders needs to happen. And in order for this to be successful and for everybody to have a say, for all the experts to give their input, there needs to be proper transparency with each and every procurement process, each and every decision made by the government. And with the transparency comes the question of accountability. So there is a little uncertainty at this stage on who ought to be held accountable if this plan doesn't work, if this falls flat. But at least from a civil society perspective, we can support the presidency in this. If the plan fails, well, at this stage, it would fall on the lap of the presidency, which we can all agree it should have actually been the job of Minister Gwede Mantashe to implement this. Mr. Gwede Mantashe has been sitting on his hands as far as new generation capacity is concerned, not making calls for proper new generation capacity determinations in terms of the Electricity Regulation Act, not adhering to what or not taking up what energy experts have said in the past. And that is why we are only now seeing intervention by the presidency. So the plan that we are talking about is by no means set in stone. This is exactly how it's going to work. Of course, there will be issues with implementation. Of course, there will be people taking advantage of maybe lucrative procurement processes. But we as a country need to accept that these challenges will come our way. But we also need to accept that it is our responsibility as a collective to address this. We are currently in an energy crisis, and if we like it or not, this is the plan that we need to work with at the moment. So we can only go up from here. There's no going back, no looking back on some of the past failures. Yes, we acknowledge there were failures. We acknowledge corruption ravaged. We acknowledge that there is fault in some of the system designs. We acknowledge that we do not know everything, how it needs to be done as in first world countries. You cannot always compare South Africa with what's happening in the West, what's happening with the developed world. We are in a very peculiar state. We are very unique, and we need to harness that uniqueness. You harness our diversity, diverse energy resources, diverse approaches in order to address this as a collective.
Yes, thank you for that, Brendan. And I see there have been a number of messages that have been coming through. We will obviously put them up on screen. But Adil, I've got one specifically for you that's come through via WhatsApp to me, where it says the ANC is due to hold its sixth policy conference in Nasrec from tomorrow, Thursday. Does Adil have any hopes of the party having meaningful talks with regards to energy?
Well, show me the delegates who are going to be discussing and proposing any of the papers at the conference, and then I will have confidence. So right now, I don't have any confidence. I know that most of the delegates who are attending, most of them have no clue and don't know much about electricity or energy generation, no transmission of power, and they don't even have a scope where they invited for the conference the public broad participation in terms of policy inputs. What I've seen coming out is actually very alarming. You've had, for instance, the DA bragging about how they are so happy that President Cyril Ramaphosa has unilaterally taken on policy inputs out of the DA's hymn book of energy policies and has unilaterally sort of implemented it into the ANC, policy, framework, which is quite actually alarming, which means that the ANC is not in charge of the country in terms of policy making, and has no confidence in itself, particularly as a movement to produce and actually craft really robust plans, particularly on the element of energy. So it's quite interesting to see that there is a policy conference, but in terms of the inputs of that policy, I know the conferences within the ANC, I attend most of them, and I'm part of the processes internally on the inside machination. And I can tell you for sure that what is going to come out of there has got nothing very clearly to do with what the delegates are going to say. Because if delegates were really responsible for crafting energy policies, you are definitely going to find a complete contrast of outputs that came out for instance, like in the past conferences where it was clearly delineated what must happen. But what we've seen of lately is that within the ANC, there is a policy structure in terms of discussion and debates, and then there's sneaking in of policy documents that comes in from somewhere overnight and gets implemented, and suddenly it's actually communicated through all the various channels, like like the policy documents that are actually circulated before conference and after conference in terms of outcomes. But in terms of really the delegates' inputs, it's very scantily, inputs that they're going to be giving, because most of them are not even experts in the area of energy and specialists in there. They should have actually consulted outright from an outside perspective and had a collective. Remember, the ANC is the ruling party as the national ruling party at the helm of the country. So it cannot just base its own policies on itself. It needs to consult extensively and engage and reach out to even those that disagree, so that we have one policy that everybody else can actually push across. But it's very concerning when you have one party that says that they are actually responsible for the current energy policy, including the current emergency policy that President Cyril Ramaphosa has just announced over the last 2 nights, which says that there is going to be an emergency and the private sector market is going to be leading the initiative of producing electricity. And very scanty, sort of inputs are coming in with regards to how Eskom itself is going to be turned around in terms of producing electricity and doing away with load shedding. People just wanted to hear one thing really out of the family meeting. How is load shedding going to be stopped? And most of it was, yes, inputs on new generation that's going to come into line, but that generation is going to come at the cost of currently Eskom's generation, as well as its own sales, as well as its own ability to produce cheaply and sell in the market at a cheap level. So there are fundamentals to these things. And yes, I agree with Brandon in most of the views, but I totally disagree when we say that South Africa should not benchmark itself with the world. South Africa has got nothing unique to the world. We are the same country that should be competing head on with everybody in the world, with everything that is available, like it was done in the past. What we have done is we've lost the competitive edge, and we're now actually almost a banana country that now has lost all its leading number one capability of producing and leading in certain sectors. Energy, we were leading. Why have we lost that edge? Is because we have allowed for mediocrity to creep in and for not holding people accountable in respect to what they are supposed to be delivering at the time and what they are paid for. Because remember, none of these people are working for free. They are being paid by us as actually taxpayers in this country, and we should be holding them responsible and reliable. But unfortunately, there's a creeping in culture that says people who are in a bureaucratic and political positions must not be held accountable unless they have stolen money, which is a really wrong view on everything that they're doing. That is why we've been very vocal on energy. From the day one, we've been active as an organization, civil society level, that has been very open. And as experts in the industry, we've been very open about our views. Whether people like it or not, we've given our inputs and our various insights on what we know from a scientific, from an engineering, from a market, from an economy point of view, from a financial point of view on what should be done to help Eskom. And I can tell you, it has made a difference, because even if they were ignoring some of our voices, they had our inputs and they know what should be done. And that is why today you have the similar reaction on what we are doing with South Africa, where there is an emergency energy policy that is going to help with regards to elevating the current load shedding crisis that we are sitting with. South Africans are fed up at all levels, and they have lost the confidence with the ruling party. And if this trend goes on further, I can assure you the ANC is going to have a hard time coming back in terms of convincing voters in 2024 to vote for them if they fail on the basics. If I was in the ANC, I was going to make sure that Eskom functions and then open up the new market. It's fantastic. Add on additional capacity to what Eskom is sitting with, which is 47,000, 50,000 megawatts of electricity capacity. Add on to that and create abundance. Right now, when we talk about demand, energy demand, there is no such a thing as energy demand, because you can't. There's not even an energy demand measure. South Africa's demand has been actually kept below its ability, whereby energy has been actually reduced over a period of time. Production of electricity has been dwindling down and down and down. That is why we're sitting at below 60% energy availability factor, which means the demand has been falling. So you cannot even measure something that was not there, because you can't build new towns, you can't build new industries, you can't build anything. Most of the smelters were shut down, most of the refineries were shut down, most of the mega production in terms of industrial scales were all shut down, including the mining shafts and everything, because there is no availability of electricity. And as a result, they had to move on to other destinations in order to find cheap electricity. So we have mismanaged something great in terms of electricity utility of South Africa.
Yes, Adil. In fact, I see there was a question early on for OUTA. I just want to read this one on screen quickly, and I'd like my engineer to bring back that question. If the plan fails, they will blame Montashe. Good vibes, got it, OUTA. We do not accept that we are being used for experiments. And I'll just wait for the other one. Okay, that's fine. We've addressed the issue with regard to the energy generation, meaningful talks on the sixth policy. So I think that will come off. I see if I've got one on my phone that says from Chris Yellen. Oh, there we go. Okay. Lifestyle Pretoria asking, please ask why OUTA is promoting experimental concepts on a national level. The UK Parliament discussed South Africa that the transition will be a model which can be used worldwide. Brendan?
Okay, so just comment on that. We obviously do not agree that we are embarking on being guinea pigs for experiments. But as far as renewables are concerned, the studies have shown that the turnaround time on construction and connecting renewables to the grid to produce electricity as soon as possible is much faster than bringing online a nuclear power plant, a coal power plant, or any gas-fired wind turbine or open cycle gas turbine for that matter. So renewable energy, as far as turnaround and efficiency is concerned, is the way to go to get as much generation capacity online as fast as possible.
Well, thank you for that. I see we are obviously running out of time. We've got about a minute. We'll just overrun for about 2 or 3 minutes. Adil, just a quick comment from you. I've got Chris Yellen, and he says, I am deeply impressed. In a tweet, he says, I am deeply impressed with the comprehensive message and plan of action by Cyril Ramaphosa. Bringing an end to load shedding with these plans is most definitely possible in a national priority project.
Well, we can only measure the plan on its implementation. Right now, it's a lovely plan. It's talking about introduction of new generation. I would like to see the opposite of it, where actually we should talk about how we're going to turn around Eskom so that load shedding is stopped. The plan itself, in terms of introducing and moving people away from the grid, it's wonderful, but it's not going to help with load shedding at this stage. So, Chris Yelland will be excited because he's part of the, behind the scene, and we call them the hidden hand that is actually part of the crafting of these policies. And he's working very closely with a couple of other people, the likes of Professor, Eberhard, and a whole lot of them who are actually based in the presidency and actually making decision-making on some of these plans. So I'm not surprised that he's excited about it. What we will be excited to see is the end of load shedding. All of us are looking for that day. And the fact that at least over the past few days, when the president has made an announcement, they're banning as much diesel as possible in order to keep the lights on. It's wonderful. Let them do whatever they need to do to make sure that there is no load shedding, and South Africans will be happy.
Yes, and just one final issue. I see there was Dr. Pali Lahoshla who said OUTA is promoting South African exceptionalism. This is a terrible disease trying to trump even engineering concepts that are universal. A quick comment from you, Brendan.
I think my message came across a bit skew when I referred to that South Africans should be viewed as a unique country. Yes, obviously we should compete on a global scale, but we have this uniqueness as far as our resources are concerned. We have a lot of wind, we have a lot of solar, which we do not see a lot of in Europe. So we need to harness what we have a lot of in order to produce sufficient electricity as best we can through the resources at our disposal.
Well, Crown Prince Adil Nchabeleng and also Brendan Slade, OUTA, thanking you both for taking time out and being part of this discussion on this Wednesday night with myself, Untitled Chapter, right here on Salam Media. Wishing both of you all the best. Please take care.
Thank you so much.
Here we go.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday Night with myself, Untitled Chapter. And yes, a number of comments that have come through. You can still view this interview and others on the Salam Media Facebook page and also on the YouTube channel. But for now, from myself and the team, it's been wonderful being in your company. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi